Let's talk about the Intellectual Property Week. It was launched yesterday, and companies can now use a new guide to showcase their intellectual properties better. The Intangibles Disclosure Framework aims to give stakeholders consistent information about a company's intangible assets, or IA. We're talking about licenses, trademarks, patents, registered designs, computer software, and films.
How does this impact you? We're getting more from Mark Teng, who's executive director of That.Legal LLC. Mark is an IP lawyer and is also one of the members of the industry working group that actually formulated the Intangibles Disclosure Framework that Lance just told you about. Mark, welcome aboard. Hi.
Hi.
Good to have you on board. Thanks for being here this evening. So, okay, break it down for us in simple terms for all of us to understand. What exactly is the framework about?
To better understand it, you have to understand that in today's digital economy, a company's value is largely in its intellectual property or intangible assets. Think about it. If you own a company, ask yourself these questions. Do you own the real estate? How much money do you have in your bank account? What's the value of your machinery or your physical inventory? A tangible asset is defined as an asset with an exchange value and a physical form. Intangibles are exactly the opposite.
Did you know that about 90% of the value of the world's biggest companies, such as Apple, Microsoft, and Google, are a direct result of their intangible assets, or IA? For example, Apple's legal right to prevent unauthorized use of its brand is arguably its biggest asset. Microsoft's legal right to prevent unauthorized copies of its Office 365 software is where their value resides. Until now, no jurisdiction has developed a framework to help regular businesses identify and understand their IA.
Mark, are intangibles classified into different categories here?
Yeah, under the framework, the intangibles are classified into a number of different categories. These are marketing related, customer related, artistic related, contract related, and technology related, as well as human capital related intangibles. So it's not just about intellectual property. It's a wider group of assets that the framework seeks to look at.
You mentioned, the Apples of the world and Disney and so on. Is this kind of framework more beneficial to the bigger companies, or will the small and medium-sized companies also benefit?
It's meant to help startups and SMEs in Singapore as well to better understand the potential for their IP, to develop an IP strategy to seek the right amount of protection, to communicate the true value of their business to stakeholders such as investors, customers, and even their own employees, and most importantly, to avoid undervaluing their business. So yes, it does apply to startups and SMEs as well.
But wouldn't the startup and the SME have very much less intangible assets at the very beginning if they're starting up?
Possibly, and that's why in the SIMM framework, the first one is strategy. To develop an IP strategy to protect the right amount of IP or intangible assets so that the business can grow moving forward from there, seek investment to build upon the intangible assets that they already have.
I'm just wondering, imagine a small, medium-sized company and they've got a really good intangible asset and they're quite happy with it. Maybe their name is gaining some form of traction, but then there's another individual, a company that notices this and starts stealing or making use of this brand or this particular trademark of theirs. How long is the entire process to reach out to them, knock on their door and say, you're doing something wrong and now you're in trouble?
What you're talking about, I think, is called intellectual property enforcement, IP enforcement, which is something that we practice just to knock on their door and inform them that you're potentially infringing IP rights. It's not something that takes very long. You just instruct your lawyers and then they serve you with a cease and desist letter and the process starts from there. I think what you're talking about is potentially a court process that can potentially be quite long drawn. In Singapore, it's quite already very efficient. And perhaps, within the span of about 6 months to a year, you can see a result. The whole idea of IDF or this framework is to help build the protections in place for a company to be able to protect these IP assets in a more efficient way, to understand what intellectual property the company owns, to protect it preemptively, and that actually reduces the costs in terms of money as well as time to enforce your IP rights.
Now, when it comes to those IP rights as well, here's a follow-up. I'm curious, maybe is there anything being done to help educate the small and medium enterprises about what they can consider as their intangible assets? Because maybe they have them, they're just not aware.
Indeed, at the launch of the Intangibles Disclosure Framework at last night's dinner, Minister Indranee Rajah recognized that businesses themselves may not fully appreciate what they own, and what the market needs is better information about intangible aspects of business. The IDF seeks to address these issues by providing a free 29-page framework that's available on the IPOS and ACRA websites. It's part of the overall Singapore IP Strategy 2030, which is a national roadmap that aims to strengthen Singapore's position as a global intangible asset and IP hub. So it's part of many initiatives to spread the word about understanding IP. And the framework is a nicely summarized guide, so to speak, for businesses to use themselves.
Okay, Mark, can individuals also benefit from this if they have, say, an artistic related IA? So it's not a company, but an individual.
It's very good that you asked that.
Or
because
YouTuber
in most
nowadays
cases,
also.
Sorry?
Or maybe YouTubers and all that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. In most cases, IP applies to business. But in certain unique situations, they may apply to individuals as well, like your YouTuber kind of situation. Under copyright law, if a person independently writes code, designs an artistic work, writes a novel, composes music, this person is recognized in law as the first owner of the copyrights subsisting in that work. And these copyrights may later be rented out through licensing or sold through an assignment. And these are just some ways of commercializing IP assets that may be owned by individuals as well.
Thanks very much, Mark, for joining us. Mark Teng, their Executive Director of That.Legal LLC. He was also one of the members of the industry working group that formulated this Intangibles Disclosure Framework that was just launched yesterday. This is Singapore Today.